The scent of copper and gunpowder still clung to Victoria Emerson's dress as her horse thundered through the darkness, each hoofbeat echoing the frantic rhythm of her heart. She had been at the wrong place at the wrong time, standing outside the St. James Hotel in Seattle, Washington Territory, on that humid August night in 1883, when she witnessed Judge Harold Pritchard shoot an unarmed man in cold blood, then watched as the judge's two hired guns dragged the body into the alley, while Pritchard calmly adjusted his hat and walked away as though he had just finished his evening meal. Victoria had pressed herself against the wooden wall, praying the shadows would swallow her whole, but when Pritchard turned back to retrieve his fallen cigar, their eyes had met for one devastating moment, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had just signed her own death warrant. She had not returned to her boarding house to collect her belongings or say goodbye to anyone. Instead, she had run straight to the livery stable, stolen the first horse she could saddle with trembling hands, and ridden east into the wild country beyond the rapidly growing city. The horse beneath her was not built for distance, already lathering with sweat after just a few hours of hard riding, but she could not afford to slow down. Judge Pritchard owned half the lawmen in Seattle and probably the other half too. There would be no justice, no protection, no safety anywhere within his reach. The moon hung low and pale in the sky as Victoria guided her exhausted mount through increasingly rough terrain. She had no plan, no destination, just an overwhelming need to put as much distance between herself and Seattle as humanly possible. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, whipping across her face as she rode, and her sensible brown dress was torn at the hem from where she had caught it climbing onto the horse. At 22 years old, Victoria had lived a careful, orderly life as a seamstress, never causing trouble, never seeking adventure. Now she was a fugitive, running for her life through wilderness she barely understood. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Victoria's horse stumbled. She managed to keep her seat, but she could feel the animal trembling beneath her, its breathing labored and uneven. Guilt flooded through her. In her desperation to escape, she had pushed the poor creature far beyond its limits. She needed to find water, shelter, something. The landscape around her had transformed from the lush evergreen forests near Seattle into something drier, more open, with scattered pines and rocky outcroppings. She must have ridden further than she realized. Victoria spotted a thin ribbon of smoke rising in the distance, and her first instinct was to turn away. But her horse was stumbling again, and she knew she could not continue much further without rest. She guided the animal toward the smoke, her hands shaking on the reins, every nerve alert for danger. As she drew closer, she could make out a small cabin nestled against a hillside, with a corral containing several horses and a few head of cattle grazing nearby. A man stood near the corral, his back to her, his posture relaxed as he worked on mending a section of fence. The man must have heard her approach because he turned, and Victoria found herself looking at a cowboy who appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sun-streaked brown hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. He wore dusty work clothes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up and well-worn leather chaps. His hand moved instinctively toward the gun at his hip, then stopped when he saw her condition. "Madam," his voice carried across the morning air, concerned but cautious. Victoria tried to dismount with some semblance of dignity, but her legs would not hold her. She collapsed onto the dusty ground, her vision swimming with exhaustion and fear. Through the haze, she was aware of the cowboy running toward her, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. "Easy now," he said, kneeling beside her. When's the last time you ate or drank anything? Victoria tried to answer, but her mouth was too dry. The cowboy disappeared briefly and returned with a canteen, supporting her head as he helped her drink. The water was cool and sweet, the best thing she had ever tasted. Slow down, he cautioned. Too much too fast will make you sick. When she had drunk enough, Victoria finally found her voice. My horse. I pushed him too hard. Please, he needs water. The cowboy glanced at her exhausted mount and nodded. I will see to him. Can you stand? With his help, Victoria managed to get to her feet, though her legs felt like jelly. The cowboy was taller than she had initially realized, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days doing hard physical work. His face was honest and open, with a strong jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. What is your name, madam? He asked as he guided her toward the cabin. Victoria. Victoria Emerson. The words came out before she could think better of it, and she immediately regretted giving her real name. But there was something about this man that made her feel, if not safe exactly, then at least not in immediate danger. I am Wilson Wright, he said. This is my place. Not much to look at, but it is home. He settled her on a chair on the covered porch that ran along the front of the cabin, then went to tend to her horse. Victoria watched as he moved with practiced efficiency, removing the saddle, checking the animal's legs and hooves, then leading it to the water trough. He did not let the horse drink too much at once, showing the same care he had shown her. When the horse had been properly cooled down and watered, Wilson put him in the corral with his own animals and brought over some hay. Only then did Wilson return to the porch, wiping his hands on his pants. Your horse will be all right, but you nearly killed him. Must have been riding most of the night. Victoria nodded, tears suddenly burning in her eyes. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her now that the adrenaline was fading. I am sorry. I did not mean to hurt him. I just had to get away. Wilson studied her face for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw there. Come inside. I will make some breakfast and you can tell me what you are running from. The interior of the cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves lined with supplies. Wilson moved around the small space with easy familiarity, stirring up the fire and putting coffee on to boil. He sliced bacon and set it to frying in an iron skillet, then cracked eggs into another pan. The smell of cooking food made Victoria's stomach clench with hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. Yesterday's lunch, perhaps, before her entire world had fallen apart. When Wilson set a plate of food in front of her, Victoria fell on it like a starving animal, barely remembering her manners. He said nothing, just poured her a cup of strong black coffee and sat down across from her with his own plate. Thank you, Victoria managed between bites. You are welcome. Wilson ate more slowly, watching her with those observant golden-brown eyes. Now, you want to tell me what sent you running through the night on a horse that was not built for it? Victoria set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone despite the half-finished food on her plate. Could she trust this stranger? Did she have any choice? I witnessed something. A murder. The man who did it, he saw me. He is powerful, wealthy, and he will want me silenced. Wilson's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardening around the edges. What man? Judge Harold Pritchard, in Seattle. Wilson let out a low whistle. That is a dangerous enemy to have. Pritchard has money and connections all through the territory. I know. Victoria's voice came out small and frightened. I did not know where else to go, I just rode. I did not even realize I had come so far. You are about 40 miles east of Seattle, Wilson told her. Near the town of Cascade Ridge, though my cabin is a good 5 miles from there. This is cattle country, drier than the coast, fewer people. Will you turn me in?" The question hung in the air between them. Wilson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Did you have anything to do with this murder besides seeing it?" "No. I was just walking back to my boarding house from a job. I had been working late, finishing a dress for a client. I heard voices in the alley and then a gunshot. I should have run immediately, but I froze. I saw everything. Then no, I will not turn you in." Wilson's voice was firm, decided. "A man who murders in cold blood and sends people after witnesses is not someone I want to help, judge or not." Relief flooded through Victoria so powerfully that she started to cry, great heaving sobs that she could not control. All the fear and exhaustion and horror of the past 12 hours came pouring out. She was dimly aware of Wilson moving his chair closer, of his hand awkwardly patting her shoulder, but mostly she just cried until there were no tears left. When she finally stopped, Victoria felt hollowed out but slightly better. Wilson handed her a handkerchief and she wiped her face, embarrassed by her display. "I am sorry," she whispered. "No need to apologize. You have been through something terrible." Wilson stood and poured more coffee for them both. "The question now is what to do with you. Pritchard will have men looking. If he saw you in Seattle, he knows your face." "I know. I thought perhaps I could keep riding east, maybe catch a train somewhere far away." Wilson shook his head. "Pritchard will have men watching the train stations. And a woman traveling alone will be noticed and remembered. The first place his men will look is transportation hubs." Victoria felt her brief hope crumbling. "Then what can I do?" Wilson was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. "Stay here. At least for now, until we can figure out a better plan. This cabin is isolated. I do not get many visitors. No one will find you here." Those words, simple and matter-of-fact, should not have meant as much as they did. But to Victoria, exhausted and terrified and completely alone in the world, they sounded like salvation. "I cannot ask you to risk yourself for a stranger." "You are not asking. I am offering." Wilson's tone left no room for argument. "Besides, I could use the help around the place. My last ranch hand left 2 months ago, and I have been managing alone since then. If you are going to stay, you might as well make yourself useful." It was perhaps not the most gracious invitation Victoria had ever received, but it was exactly what she needed. Not pity or charity, but a practical arrangement that let her keep some dignity. "I am a seamstress by trade, but I can learn other things. I am a hard worker." "Then we have a deal. You can have the bed. I will sleep in the barn for now." "I cannot take your bed," Victoria protested. Wilson was already standing, clearing the plates. "Yes, you can. Now get some rest. You look like you are about to fall over." Victoria wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She barely managed to kick off her boots before collapsing onto the bed, still fully clothed. She was asleep before Wilson had finished washing the dishes. When Victoria woke, the angle of the light through the window told her it was late afternoon. She lay still for a moment, disoriented before the memories came flooding back. Judge Pritchard. The murder. Her desperate flight through the night. Wilson Wright and his unexpected kindness. She sat up slowly, her body aching in a dozen places from the hard ride. Through the window, she could see Wilson working with one of his horses in the corral, patient and unhurried. She watched him for a few minutes, noting the easy competence with which he moved, the gentle way he spoke to the animal. Victoria stood and looked around the cabin with fresh eyes. It was small but well maintained, everything in its place. A man's space, certainly, but cleaner than she might have expected. She noticed a shelf of books near the bed and was surprised by the titles. Not just dime novels and almanacs, but real literature. Shakespeare, Dickens, even some poetry. Feeling restless and wanting to make herself useful, Victoria explored the cabin more thoroughly. She found Wilson's limited food supplies and began planning a proper meal. It was the least she could do after he had taken her in. She found flour, canned beans, some dried beef, and the beginning of an idea formed in her mind by the time Wilson came in from his work. Dusty and tired, Victoria had biscuits baking in the oven and a pot of beans flavored with the dried beef simmering over the fire. She had also discovered a pathetic vegetable garden behind the cabin that was more weeds than plants, but she had managed to salvage a few carrots and an onion that she added to the beans. Wilson stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You did not have to do this. You said I should make myself useful. I may not know anything about cattle or horses, but I can cook." Victoria stirred the beans, then checked the biscuits. "It will be ready soon. There is water heating if you want to wash up." Something that might have been gratitude or pleasure crossed Wilson's face. "That sounds real good. Thank you." They ate together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Wilson told her about his ranch, how he had bought this land 3 years ago with money saved from working as a trail hand. It was not much yet, just a small herd and a lot of hard work, but it was his, and he was building something. Victoria found herself relaxing as he talked, his voice deep and soothing. There was something solid about Wilson Wright, something fundamentally decent. She could tell he was not the sort of man who made promises lightly, which made his promise to protect her all the more meaningful. "What about you?" Wilson asked. "How did you end up in Seattle?" "I was born in Portland," Victoria said. "My parents died when I was 16, influenza. I had been apprenticed to a seamstress since I was 12, so I had a trade at least. I moved to Seattle 2 years ago because there was more work there. I thought I would make a better life for myself in a bigger city." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose that did not work out as planned." "You are alive," Wilson pointed out. "That is more than the man Pritchard killed can say." "Do you know who he was?" "The man who was murdered," Wilson shook his head. "News travels slow out here, and I do not make it into Seattle often. Did you recognize him?" "No. He was young, maybe 30 at most. Dark hair, well-dressed." He seemed surprised when Pritchard pulled the gun, like he had been expecting a conversation, not violence. Victoria shuddered at the memory. Pritchard just shot him. No warning, no hesitation. Then those 2 men appeared from nowhere and dragged the body away like they had done it 100 times before. "Probably have," Wilson said grimly. "Men like Pritchard do not get that comfortable with murder overnight." They were quiet for a while, the weight of what Victoria had witnessed hanging heavy between them. Finally, Wilson stood and began clearing the dishes. "You should write a letter," he said, "to anyone in Seattle who might worry about you, your landlady, friends, anyone like that. I will post it from Cascade Ridge, make it look like you sent it from somewhere far away. That way Pritchard's men will not focus their search around here." It was a smart idea, and Victoria felt a rush of gratitude for Wilson's quick thinking. "Thank you. That is very clever. I have my moments." Wilson actually smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. That night, Victoria wrote a brief letter to Mrs. Henderson, the widow who ran the boarding house where she had been renting a room. She kept it vague, saying only that she had been called away on a family emergency and would not be returning. She apologized for leaving without notice and hoped Mrs. Henderson would forgive her. She did not include a return address. Wilson took the letter the next morning, riding into Cascade Ridge while Victoria stayed at the cabin. He was gone for several hours, and Victoria spent the time exploring the property more thoroughly. The garden was in desperate need of attention, but it had good bones. With some work, it could provide fresh vegetables. The cabin itself could use a woman's touch, more for organization than cleanliness. Wilson clearly did his best, but there were inefficiencies everywhere that Victoria's practical mind immediately wanted to address. She was hanging the spare blankets out to air when Wilson returned, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. "I figured if you are staying, we needed more food," he explained. "Also picked up some fabric and thread since you mentioned being a seamstress. Thought you might want to make yourself some proper work clothes." Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. It was such a simple, thoughtful gesture. "Thank you. That is very kind." Wilson unloaded the supplies and Victoria helped him carry everything inside. Along with the food and fabric, he had brought newspapers from Seattle. They spread them out on the table and read through them carefully. The murder was not mentioned anywhere. Not even a small notice about an unidentified body or a missing person. It was as though it had never happened. "Pritchard covered it up completely," Victoria said, her stomach churning. "That poor man, whoever he was, does he have a family wondering where he is? Does anyone even know he is dead? Probably not." Wilson's jaw was tight with anger. That is the power of having money and connections. You can make inconvenient truths disappear. But not me. I am a truth he cannot make disappear so easily. "No," Wilson agreed, "which is why you need to stay hidden until we figure out what to do." Over the following days, they settled into a routine. Victoria took over the cooking and the garden, determined to nurse the neglected plants back to health, and to put in some late summer vegetables that might still have time to grow before the first frost. She also began making improvements inside the cabin, organizing Wilson's supplies and creating more efficient storage. In the evenings, she worked on sewing herself some practical clothes more suitable for ranch life than her torn town dress. Wilson worked with his cattle and horses during the day, but he also began teaching Victoria the basics of ranch work. How to feed the animals, how to recognize when they were sick or injured, how to mend fences and repair tack. Victoria proved to be a quick learner, and Wilson was a patient teacher. They talked a lot as they worked. Wilson told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his own parents when he was young and working his way west as a cowboy. He had a dry sense of humor that caught Victoria by surprise and made her laugh at unexpected moments. She found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, about her dreams of having her own dress shop someday, about the loneliness of being alone in the world with no family. "You are not alone now," Wilson said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "You have got a place here as long as you need it." "I am grateful," Victoria said, "but I cannot hide forever. Eventually I will have to figure out what to do with my life." "Eventually," Wilson agreed, "but not today. Today you are safe and that is enough." It should have felt strange living in such close quarters with a man she barely knew, but somehow it did not. Wilson was unfailingly respectful, always making sure she had privacy and never making her feel uncomfortable. And Victoria found that she genuinely enjoyed his company. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a quiet strength that made her feel protected without feeling controlled. 3 weeks after Victoria's arrival, Wilson rode into Cascade Ridge for more supplies and returned with troubling news. "Pritchard has men asking questions," he told her, offering a reward for information about a young woman who went missing from Seattle around the time of what they are calling a robbery gone wrong. "They are showing a description that matches you pretty well." Victoria felt her blood run cold. "How far out are they searching?" "They have been through Cascade Ridge questioning people. So far no one has mentioned seeing you, but that is probably because no one did see you. You rode straight here without going into town." What if they come here? What if someone tells them about your ranch? Wilson considered this. A few people know I exist, but I keep to myself mostly. Still, it is possible someone might mention me. We should come up with a story, just in case. They spent the evening working out a plausible explanation for Victoria's presence. If anyone asked, she was Wilson's cousin from back east, come to help him with the ranch after recovering from a lengthy illness. It explained why no one had seen her arrive, and why she would be staying for an indefinite period. We should probably also say we are engaged, Wilson added, his ears turning slightly red. It would explain why you are living here unchaperoned. People might talk otherwise. Victoria felt her own cheeks heating. That is sensible, just for appearances. Just for appearances, Wilson echoed. But something had shifted between them with those words. Suddenly, Victoria was aware of Wilson in a different way, noticing the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the competent strength in his hands. She found herself wondering what it would be like if their pretend engagement were real. That night, lying in the narrow bed that still smelled faintly of Wilson, Victoria forced herself to confront feelings she had been carefully ignoring. Somewhere over the past 3 weeks, she had developed feelings for Wilson Wright that went far beyond gratitude. She found herself looking forward to his company, to the sound of his voice, to the rare moments when he smiled. She loved watching him work, loved the gentle way he treated his animals, loved the thoughtful questions he asked when they talked in the evenings. But falling for Wilson was foolish and dangerous. She was a fugitive hiding from a powerful man who wanted her dead. She had no future to offer anyone, and Wilson deserved better than a woman with a price on her head. She needed to guard her heart, keep things practical and friendly, but nothing more. That resolution lasted exactly until the next morning, when Victoria stepped outside to find Wilson splitting wood for the winter stores. His shirt was off in the early morning heat, and the sight of his bare chest and shoulders, muscles flexing with each powerful stroke of the axe, made her mouth go dry. When he noticed her and smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead, something in Victoria's chest pulled tight and sweet. She was in trouble. Deep, complicated trouble that had nothing to do with Judge Pritchard and everything to do with a cowboy who had promised to keep her safe. The summer heat gave way to the cooler temperatures of early September. Victoria's garden produced a surprising bounty of late vegetables, which she preserved and canned for the winter months ahead. She had also finished making herself several practical dresses, and had started working on a new shirt for Wilson after noticing how threadbare his existing ones were becoming. Wilson seemed touched but embarrassed when she presented him with the finished shirt made from sturdy blue cotton that matched his eyes. "You did not have to do this," he protested. "I wanted to. You have done so much for me. This is a small thing." Victoria busied herself with folding the fabric scraps so she would not have to meet his eyes. The truth was, she had spent far more time on that shirt than was strictly necessary, making sure every stitch was perfect, imagining Wilson wearing it. "It is not a small thing," Wilson said quietly. "Thank you, Victoria." The way he said her name, soft and warm, made her heart race. She was so lost in him, so far gone, and she had no idea what to do about it. That afternoon, they were mending fence together when Wilson suddenly grabbed her arm and pulled her down behind a rocky outcropping. "Someone is coming," he whispered. Victoria's heart hammered as she heard the sound of approaching horses. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see 2 men riding slowly across Wilson's property, their eyes scanning the landscape. They wore guns low on their hips and had the hard, dangerous look of hired muscle. "Stay down and stay quiet," Wilson murmured. "I will handle this." Before Victoria could protest, Wilson stood and walked out to intercept the riders, moving with a casual confidence that belied the tension she had felt in his body moments before. "Help you gentlemen with something," Wilson called out. The riders reined in their horses. "This your land?" One of them asked. "It is, Wilson Wright. I run cattle here." "We are looking for someone," the other rider said. "A woman, young, dark hair, slender build, went missing from Seattle about a month back. Her family is real worried about her." "Can't say I have seen anyone matching that description," Wilson said easily. "I do not get many visitors out here. It is pretty isolated." "You live here alone?" "I do, just me and my animals." The first rider looked toward the cabin. "Mind if we take a look around?" "I do, actually." Wilson's voice remained pleasant but firm. "This is private property and you have got no legal authority to search it, unless you are lawmen with a warrant." "We are not lawmen," the second rider admitted. "Just hired to find the woman. There is a reward." "Well, she is not here, so you are wasting your time. And mine." Wilson crossed his arms. "I suggest you move along." The two men exchanged glances. For a moment, Victoria thought they might push the issue, and she quietly picked up a fist-sized rock, ready to defend herself if necessary. But then the first rider shrugged. "If you see anyone matching that description, there is good money in it for you. Ask for Mr. Pritchard in Seattle." "I will keep that in mind," Wilson said, not moving until the two men had turned their horses and ridden away. Victoria stayed hidden until Wilson came back for her, his expression grim. "They are searching systematically. This is not going to stop." "Maybe I should leave," Victoria said, though the thought made her chest ache. "I am putting you in danger." "No." Wilson's response was immediate and emphatic. "You are not going anywhere. This just means we need to be more careful." They returned to the cabin, both of them shaken. That evening, Wilson moved his bedroll from the barn back into the cabin, setting it up near the fireplace. "If anyone does come snooping around while I am out working, I want to be able to hear if there is trouble," he explained. Having Wilson sleeping just a few feet away made Victoria acutely aware of every sound he made in the night. She lay awake far too long, listening to his steady breathing and wondering what it would be like to cross that small distance between them. The close call with Pritchard's men seemed to have affected Wilson too. He became more protective, insisting that Victoria stay close to the cabin when he was working the far pastures. He taught her how to shoot, taking her out to practice with his spare revolver until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. "I do not ever want you to have to use this," Wilson said. "But if you do, I want you to be ready." They were standing close together, Wilson's arms around her as he adjusted her grip on the gun, and Victoria could barely concentrate on his instructions. She was too aware of the solid warmth of his body behind her, the smell of leather and sage that clung to him, the sound of his voice rumbling in his chest. When she finally hit the center of the target, Wilson whooped with delight and picked her up, spinning her around. Victoria laughed, giddy with success and the feeling of being held in his strong arms. When he set her down, their faces were inches apart, and for one breathless moment she thought he might kiss her, but Wilson stepped back, clearing his throat awkwardly. "You did good, real good." The moment passed, but something lingered in the air between them, electric and unresolved. October arrived with crisp mornings and the first hints of color in the leaves. Victoria had been at the cabin for 2 months, and her old life in Seattle felt like a distant dream. This was real. The ranch, the animals, the simple rhythms of each day. And Wilson, most of all Wilson, was real. They had developed an easy partnership, working together seamlessly. Victoria could now handle most of the daily chores around the ranch, freeing Wilson to focus on the heavier work. In the evenings, they would sit together and read, or Wilson would play a battered harmonica he kept in a drawer, filling the cabin with sweet, melancholy melodies. "Where did you learn to play?" Victoria asked one evening. "My mother taught me. It is one of the few things I have left from her." Wilson looked down at the harmonica in his hands. "She died when I was 10. Some days I can barely remember her face, but I remember her teaching me to play this." Victoria reached out and touched his hand. "I am sure she would be proud of the man you have become." Wilson turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "I am not sure about that. I have made plenty of mistakes in my life. We all have. That does not mean we are not worthy of pride or of love." The last word hung in the air between them. Wilson's eyes met hers, dark and intense in the firelight. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough with some emotion she could not quite name. "Yes. These past 2 months, having you here, they have been the best months I can remember in a long time. Maybe ever." Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "For me too. I know this started as me helping you, giving you a safe place to hide, but it has become more than that, at least for me." Wilson was still holding her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you when I am working. I want to hear your opinion on things, hear you laugh. I just want to be near you." "Wilson," Victoria whispered. "I am falling in love with you," Wilson said. "Maybe I already have fallen. I know the timing is terrible and you have every reason to focus on staying safe rather than thinking about romance. But I needed you to know. I needed to be honest with you." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was foolish and complicated and impossible, but I cannot help it. I love you, Wilson Wright." Wilson reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Then we will figure out the rest. Together. Because I am not letting you go, Victoria Emerson. Not to Pritchard's men, not to fear, not to anything." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Victoria melted into him. All the tension and longing of the past weeks finally found release as they held each other close, pouring everything they felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wilson rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me. Not just until this trouble with Pritchard is over, but after. Stay and build a life here with me." "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, I will stay. I want nothing more than to build a life with you." They kissed again, longer and deeper this time, and when Wilson picked her up and carried her to the bed, Victoria went willingly. They spent the night wrapped in each other's arms, exploring this new dimension of their relationship with wonder and passion and profound tenderness. In the morning, Victoria woke to find Wilson propped up on one elbow, watching her with such adoration in his eyes that it made her breath catch. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning." Victoria stretched like a cat, feeling deliciously relaxed and happy despite all the complications still facing them. "I have been thinking," Wilson said, "about how to handle the situation with Pritchard." Victoria tensed slightly. In the joy of the night before, she had almost forgotten about the judge and his men. "Almost. We cannot just wait and hope they never find you," Wilson continued. "Eventually someone will see you, or those men will come back with more people to search the area thoroughly. We need a more permanent solution. What do you suggest?" Wilson was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What Pritchard did, murdering that man, you are the only witness. Without you, there is no case against him. But with you, and with the right people listening, maybe justice could be done." "You want me to come forward?" "Wilson, he would kill me before I ever made it to any kind of trial." "Not if we do it right. Not if we go to the territorial governor directly, bypass all of Pritchard's local connections. The governor is an honest man from what I have heard. He would not be in Pritchard's pocket. Victoria sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. That is a huge risk. I know. But what is the alternative? You spend the rest of your life hiding, always looking over your shoulder. We can never go into town together, never have a real life. I want to marry you properly, Victoria. I want everyone to know you are my wife. I want to build something with you, but I want to do it in the open, not in hiding. It was tempting, so tempting. The idea of ending this nightmare of living without fear, but the risk was enormous. If it goes wrong, if Pritchard gets to me before the governor can protect me, I will die, and you would probably die trying to defend me. Then we make sure it does not go wrong. Wilson took her hands. We plan it carefully. We get help from people we can trust, but we do something, Victoria. We fight back. Victoria looked into his eyes and saw determination, courage, and love. This man was willing to risk everything for her to help her reclaim her life. How could she do any less? All right, she said. Let us make a plan. Over the next few days, they worked out the details. Wilson had a friend in Cascade Ridge, a retired marshal named Frank Donovan who had a reputation for integrity. They would approach Frank first, explain the situation, and ask for his help in getting Victoria safely to the territorial capital of Olympia, where the governor's office was located. Frank is a good man, Wilson assured her. If anyone can help us navigate this safely, it is him. They waited until the next time Wilson needed to go into Cascade Ridge for supplies. This time, Victoria went with him, dressed in her oldest, plainest dress with her hair pinned up under a bonnet that shadowed her face. Her heart hammered the entire ride into town, expecting at any moment to see Pritchard's men, but they made it to Cascade Ridge without incident. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses. Wilson led her to a neat cabin on the edge of town where Frank Donovan lived. Frank was in his 60s, with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Victoria's story without interruption, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. "Harold Pritchard," Frank said when she finished. "I always suspected that man was crooked, but a judge-murderer is something else entirely. You are right that the local law will not touch him. But the governor might. Can you help us get to Olympia?" Wilson asked. Frank nodded slowly. "I can. I still have connections from my martial days. Give me a week to make some arrangements, send some telegrams to people I trust. We will do this properly, with enough protection that Pritchard's men would have to fight through a small army to get to Miss Emerson." Relief flooded through Victoria. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." "I have an idea." Frank's expression softened slightly. "No woman should have to live in fear for witnessing a crime, and no man should be able to murder with impunity just because he has money and power." They left Frank's cabin with lighter hearts than they had arrived with. On the ride back to the ranch, Wilson reached over and took Victoria's hand. "It is going to be all right. We are going to end this, and then we can have the life we both want." "I believe you," Victoria said, and she meant it. The week of waiting was difficult. Every sound made them jump. Every distant rider made them tense. But they also made the most of their time together, knowing that soon they would be embarking on a journey that would either free them or destroy them. Wilson proposed properly one evening, getting down on one knee with a simple gold band he had bought in Cascade Ridge. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it is real gold, and it means every promise I am making you. Will you marry me, Victoria Emerson? Will you be my wife in truth, not just in the story we tell strangers?" "Yes," Victoria said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They made love that night with a new urgency, as though trying to memorize every touch, every sensation, in case the future was not as certain as they hoped. When Frank sent word that everything was arranged, Victoria felt both relieved and terrified. They were to meet him in 3 days, and from there, they would travel to Olympia under the protection of several retired lawmen who still believed in justice. "Whatever happens," Victoria told Wilson the night before they were set to leave, "I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me more than just safety. You gave me love and a reason to believe in a future." "Nothing is going to happen," Wilson said fiercely, pulling her close. "We are going to see this through, testify against Pritchard, and come back here to live our lives in peace. I am going to marry you, and we are going to fill this cabin with children and laughter and love. That is the future we are going to have, Victoria. I promise you." She wanted to believe him. She chose to believe him. They left for Cascade Ridge at dawn, with Wilson riding beside Victoria and his rifle resting across his saddle. They reached Frank's cabin without incident and found not just the retired marshal waiting, but 3 other hard-eyed men who had the look of former lawmen about them. "These are men I would trust with my life," Frank told them. "They have all dealt with corruption and powerful men who thought they were above the law. They want to help." The journey to Olympia took 5 days. They traveled mostly through back country, avoiding main roads and towns where Pritchard might have eyes. The retired lawmen took turns keeping watch at night, and Victoria never felt unsafe despite the danger she knew they were in. Wilson stayed close to her the entire journey, his presence a constant comfort. At night, when they made camp, he would hold her and they would talk quietly about their plans for the future. The ranch they would build together, the improvements they would make to the cabin, the life they would create. "I want at least 3 children," Wilson told her one night. "Enough to fill the house with noise and chaos." "3 sounds good," Victoria agreed. "Maybe 4. As many as you want to give me." Wilson kissed her forehead. "I just want a life with you, however that looks." They reached Olympia on a gray, drizzly afternoon. The territorial capital was larger than Seattle, more established, with solid government buildings and an air of permanence. Frank took them directly to the governor's mansion, where he had arranged a private meeting. Governor Miles Henderson was a stern-looking man in his 50s, with keen intelligence in his eyes. He listened to Victoria's testimony with complete attention, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly just letting her tell the story in her own words. When she finished, the governor leaned back in his chair. "This is a serious accusation against a sitting judge." "I know what I saw," Victoria said firmly. "Judge Pritchard murdered a man in cold blood, and then his hired men disposed of the body. I can describe exactly what happened, what he was wearing, what was said. I am willing to swear to all of it under oath. The problem is that it is your word against that of a respected judge," the governor said. "No body has been found, no crime has been reported. Pritchard will simply deny everything and claim you are lying, possibly trying to extort money from him." Victoria felt her hope crumbling. "So he gets away with it. He gets away with murder because he is powerful and I am no one." "I did not say that." The governor held up a hand. "I said it is a problem, not that it is insurmountable. Judge Pritchard's name has come across my desk before in connection with questionable rulings and allegations of bribery. Nothing ever stuck, but where there is smoke, there is usually fire. Your testimony gives me grounds to open a formal investigation." "What does that mean for Victoria?" Wilson asked, speaking for the first time. "It means she will need to stay in protective custody until we can build a case. We will investigate thoroughly, look for that body, talk to people who might have information about the victim or about Pritchard's other activities. If we can corroborate any part of Miss Emerson's testimony, we can bring charges." "How long will this take?" Victoria asked. "Weeks, possibly months. But you will be safe. I will personally ensure it." Victoria looked at Wilson, seeing her own mixed feelings reflected in his face. This was not the quick resolution they had hoped for, but it was something. It was justice, or at least the possibility of justice. "All right," Victoria said. "I will stay. I will do whatever is necessary to see Harold Pritchard answer for what he did." Governor Henderson nodded approvingly. "You are a brave woman, Miss Emerson. Not many people would be willing to stand up to someone as powerful as Pritchard." "She is the bravest person I know," Wilson said quietly, his hand finding Victoria's. The governor arranged for Victoria to stay in a secure location, a small house on the grounds of the governor's mansion that was normally used for official guests. Wilson was allowed to stay with her, as was Frank Donovan and two of the other retired lawmen who had escorted them to Olympia. The weeks that followed were strange. Victoria was safe, but also trapped, unable to leave the grounds or have any contact with the outside world beyond the official investigators, who came regularly to take her statement and ask more questions. Wilson was her anchor through it all, keeping her spirits up, reminding her why they were doing this. News finally came in early December. Investigators had found the body, buried in a shallow grave outside Seattle. The victim had been identified as Thomas Brennan, a young lawyer who had been gathering evidence of corruption in Pritchard's court. They had also found 2 witnesses who could place Pritchard at the scene around the time of the murder, and bank records showing large payments from Pritchard to the 2 men who had disposed of the body. With Victoria's testimony as the foundation and all this corroborating evidence, the Territorial Attorney General filed charges against Judge Harold Pritchard for murder, conspiracy, and corruption. Pritchard was arrested, though he immediately made bail and vowed to fight the charges. "There will be a trial," Governor Henderson told Victoria when he came to give her the news personally. "And you will be the key witness. Are you prepared for that?" Victoria took a deep breath and nodded. "I am. I want to see this through." The trial took place in late January of 1884, in a courtroom packed with spectators and journalists. Pritchard sat at the defense table looking calm and confident, surrounded by expensive lawyers. But when Victoria took the stand and told her story in clear, unflinching detail, she saw that confidence waver. The defense attorneys tried to tear apart her testimony, suggesting she was mistaken, that it had been too dark to see clearly, that she was looking for attention or money. But Victoria held firm, and the prosecutors presented all the corroborating evidence they had gathered. The body, the witnesses, the financial records, even testimony from other people who claimed Pritchard had threatened or intimidated them. The trial lasted 2 weeks. At the end of it, the jury deliberated for less than a day before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges. Judge Harold Pritchard was sentenced to hang. When the verdict was read, Victoria felt no triumph, only a deep, bone-weary relief. It was over. Finally, it was over. Wilson was waiting for her outside the courtroom, and she walked straight into his arms. "Let us go home," she whispered. "Yes," Wilson agreed. "Let us go home." They were married quietly in Cascade Ridge 3 weeks later, with Frank Donovan standing as witness. Victoria wore a dress she had made herself from cream-colored silk, and Wilson wore his best suit and the shirt Victoria had sewn for him. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Victoria felt as though her life was truly beginning again. They returned to Wilson's ranch, which was now their ranch, and threw themselves into building the life they had dreamed about during those long nights on the road to Olympia. Spring came early that year, and Victoria planted an ambitious garden, expanding far beyond the small plot Wilson had maintained. She also began taking in sewing work from women in Cascade Ridge, building a small reputation for quality craftsmanship. Wilson expanded his herd and built a larger barn. He talked about hiring a proper ranch hand come summer, now that they could afford it. The ranch was growing, becoming more prosperous, and they were building something real and lasting together. In June, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Wilson one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the look of pure joy on his face made her laugh with delight. "A baby," Wilson said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Victoria confirmed. "Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. Wilson pulled her into his lap and held her close. "You have given me everything, Victoria. A home that feels like a home, a purpose beyond just surviving, and now a child. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Victoria said. "Thank you for saving me, for protecting me, for giving me a life worth fighting for." Their son was born in late February of 1885, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. They named him Thomas, after the young lawyer whose murder Victoria had witnessed, the man whose death had inadvertently brought them together. It seemed right to honor his memory that way, to give him a kind of immortality through the life that Victoria and Wilson were building. Little Thomas was followed by a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Rose, and then another son they called James. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Wilson adding 2 more rooms and a proper parlor. The ranch prospered as well. They hired 2 ranch hands and increased their herd significantly. Victoria's sewing business grew until she had more work than she could handle, and she began teaching Rose to sew almost as soon as the little girl could hold a needle. Judge Pritchard was hanged in the spring of 1885. Victoria did not attend the execution. She had no desire to watch a man die, even a man who had tried to have her killed. It was enough to know that justice had been served, that he could never hurt anyone else. Sometimes, late at night, Victoria would wake from nightmares about that terrible night in Seattle. But Wilson was always there to hold her, to remind her that she was safe, that the danger was past. And as the years went by, the nightmares came less and less frequently, until they finally stopped altogether. Life was not always easy. Winters could be brutal. Summers could bring drought, and raising children while running a ranch and a business was exhausting work. But Victoria had never been happier. She had a husband who adored her, children who filled her days with laughter and love, and a home that was truly hers. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wilson gave her a gift. It was a small wooden sign that read Wright Ranch, established 1883, with both their names carved beneath. "I wanted you to know that this has always been ours," Wilson told her. "From the moment you arrived here, scared and running for your life, this became our place, our home, our future." Victoria traced the letters of her name carved into the wood, feeling the emotion rising in her throat. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I was terrified that Pritchard would find me?" "I said no one will find you here," Wilson recalled. "You were right. But you gave me more than just a hiding place. You gave me a life, a real life, better than anything I could have imagined for myself." Victoria looked up at him, this man who had saved her in every way that mattered. "I fell in love with you somewhere between learning to shoot and learning to mend fences. Somewhere between your terrible coffee and your beautiful harmonica playing. I fell in love with your kindness and your strength, and the way you made me feel safe without making me feel weak. I fell in love with you when you cried over pushing that horse too hard," Wilson said. "I saw your compassion, your strength, your determination to survive. And then I fell in love with you more every single day after that." They stood together looking out over the land they had built into a thriving ranch, with their children playing in the yard, and the sun setting in brilliant shades of gold and pink. Victoria leaned into Wilson's solid warmth and thought about that terrified girl who had ridden through the darkness 2 years ago, running from death and certain only that she needed to survive. She could never have imagined then that running for her life would lead her to this, to a love so deep and true that it still took her breath away. But she was grateful for every twist of fate that had brought her to Wilson's door, grateful for every moment they had shared since then. "I love you," Victoria said simply. "I love you too," Wilson replied, "always and forever." And as their children called them to dinner, and the last light faded from the sky, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Not just in this place, but with this man, this family, this life they had built together from courage and hope and love. Years continued to pass in the kind of quiet contentment that Victoria had once thought existed only in storybooks. The Wright Ranch became known throughout the territory as a prosperous, well-run operation, and Wilson's reputation as a fair and honest man brought him respect from everyone who knew him. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved the ranch and the animals with the same dedication his father showed. Rose was bright and creative, showing talent for both sewing and drawing. James, the youngest, was wild and adventurous, always getting into some scrape or another, but with such cheerful enthusiasm that it was hard to stay angry with him. Victoria continued her sewing business, but she also began writing down her story. At first it was just for herself, a way to process everything that had happened. But eventually she realized that other women might find strength in knowing that it was possible to survive terrible things, to face down powerful men who thought they were untouchable, and to build a good life on the other side of fear. She published her account in a territorial newspaper, anonymously at first, but then under her own name when she realized she no longer needed to hide. The response was overwhelming. Women wrote to her from all over the territory and beyond, thanking her for her courage, asking for advice, sharing their own stories of survival and perseverance. "You are inspiring people," Wilson told her proudly after yet another batch of letters arrived. "I am just telling the truth," Victoria said, "about what happened and about what it takes to keep going when everything seems impossible. That is why it matters, because you lived it, because you survived it." On their 15th anniversary, Wilson took Victoria on a trip to Seattle. It was her first time back since that terrible night, and she was nervous about how she would feel. But Seattle had grown and changed in the intervening years, and when they walked past the St. James Hotel where she had witnessed the murder, Victoria felt only a distant echo of the fear that had once consumed her. They stayed in a nice hotel, and Wilson took her to dinner at a fine restaurant and bought her a beautiful necklace that she protested was too expensive. "Nothing is too expensive for my wife," he insisted. As they walked through the city at night, Victoria realized that Seattle no longer held any power over her. This was just a place, nothing more. Her real life, her true home, was back at the ranch with Wilson and their children. "Thank you for bringing me here," she told Wilson. "I needed to see that I am not afraid anymore." "You were never really afraid," Wilson said. "Cautious, yes. Smart about danger, absolutely. But truly afraid? No, you faced down Pritchard and his men. You testified in front of a courtroom full of people who wanted to intimidate you. You built a business and raised a family and lived your life fully despite everything that happened. That is not fear, Victoria. That is courage." They returned home to find their children had, with Frank Donovan's help, planned a surprise party. Half of Cascade Ridge seemed to be crammed into their expanded cabin and spilling out onto the porch and yard. There was music and dancing and more food than Victoria could have imagined their friends preparing. "Happy anniversary," Thomas said, hugging his mother. At 13, he was already nearly as tall as she was. "Thank you, sweetheart. This is wonderful." Rose and James added their own hugs and enthusiastic declarations of love. Victoria looked around at all these people, their friends and neighbors, the community they had become part of, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. When someone called for a toast, Wilson stood and raised his glass. 15 years ago, I was just a cowboy trying to make a go of a small ranch. Then Victoria came into my life and everything changed. She is the strongest, bravest, most amazing person I have ever known, and I fall in love with her more deeply every single day. To my wife, the love of my life. To Victoria, the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she stood and held up her own glass. And to my husband, who saw a terrified woman fleeing for her life and did not hesitate to help, who gave me safety and love and a reason to believe in happy endings. Wilson, you are my hero, my partner, and my best friend. I love you with everything I am. They kissed as the crowd cheered, and Victoria thought about that first kiss all those years ago when she had finally admitted her feelings and he had promised to keep her safe. He had kept that promise and so many others besides. The party lasted late into the night, with music and laughter echoing across the ranch. When everyone had finally gone home and the children were asleep, Victoria and Wilson sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked. "Taking me in that day, your life would have been simpler without all the danger and complications I brought." Wilson was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret nothing. Yes, there was danger and fear and uncertainty. But Victoria, you gave me a reason to be more than just a man running cattle. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life full of love and meaning. If I could go back to that morning when you rode up on that exhausted horse, I would do everything exactly the same. I would help you, protect you, and fall in love with you all over again. I would not change anything either," Victoria admitted, "even the terrible parts, because they led me to you." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and one of the horses whinnied softly in the corral. "What do you think our life will look like in another 15 years? Victoria wondered aloud. "Well, Thomas will be running the ranch by then, probably married with children of his own. Rose will have her own dress shop, I imagine, or maybe she will be off somewhere creating art. James will be doing something adventurous and probably giving us gray hair with worry." Wilson smiled. "And you and I will be sitting right here, watching our grandchildren play in the yard and remembering all the years that brought us to that moment." "That sounds perfect," Victoria said softly. "It does not it?" Wilson pulled her close. "I used to think the best part of my life was behind me, that I was just going through the motions until my time was done. Then you showed up and everything changed. The best parts of my life have all been with you, and I believe the best is still to come." Victoria rested her head on his shoulder, feeling safe and loved and complete. "I love you, Wilson Wright." "I love you too, Victoria Wright. Always." The years proved Wilson's predictions remarkably accurate. Thomas did indeed take over much of the ranch management as he grew older, showing a natural aptitude for the work and a level head in making decisions. He married a sweet-natured girl from Cascade Ridge named Anna, and they gave Wilson and Victoria their first grandchildren, twin boys who were as rambunctious as their Uncle James had been. Rose moved to Seattle and opened her own dress shop, which quickly became the most fashionable in the city. She never married, declaring herself quite content with her independence and her work, though she visited the ranch often and doted on her nephews and niece. James joined the Territorial Rangers for a few years, satisfying his thirst for adventure, before returning to the ranch to help Thomas. He married later than anyone expected, to a widow with 2 children of her own, and settled into family life with surprising contentment. Victoria published more of her writings, becoming known throughout the growing state of Washington as an advocate for women's rights and for justice reform. She traveled occasionally to give speeches, always with Wilson at her side, and their partnership became something of a legend in its own right. But through all the changes and growth, through children becoming adults and grandchildren being born, the heart of their life remained the same. The ranch, the land, the simple rhythms of work and rest and love. On their 25th anniversary, Wilson took Victoria back to the spot where they had first met. The cabin had been expanded and improved so many times that it barely resembled the simple structure it had been, but the location was the same, and the view across the valley was just as beautiful. "I stood right here," Wilson said, "and saw a woman who looked like she had been to hell and back. I remember thinking I should probably send her on her way, that helping her would bring trouble to my door." "What made you change your mind?" Victoria asked, though she had heard this story before. "Your eyes. You looked terrified but not broken, desperate but not defeated. I saw strength in you even in that moment, and I knew you were worth fighting for." Wilson took her hands in his. "Best decision I ever made. Best decision I ever made was trusting you. When you said no one would find me here, I chose to believe you. I chose to stay, to trust this stranger who had every reason to send me away. And that choice gave me everything I have now." They stood together looking out over the ranch they had built, the life they had created, and Victoria felt the weight of 25 years of love and partnership settling over her like a warm blanket. There had been hard times, certainly. They had lost a child between James and Rose, a daughter who had been stillborn, and that grief had nearly broken them. They had struggled through droughts and hard winters and financial difficulties. There had been arguments and frustrations and all the normal challenges of any long marriage. But through it all, they had held onto each other. They had chosen love over and over again, through good times and bad, through joy and sorrow. That was the real miracle, Victoria thought. Not that they had fallen in love in the first place, but that they had worked every day to stay in love, to be partners and friends as well as husband and wife. "What are you thinking about?" Wilson asked, seeing the expression on her face. "That I am grateful. For all of it, even the hard parts. Because they made us who we are." Victoria looked up at him, seeing the lines that time had etched around his eyes and mouth, the gray that threaded through his hair. He was older now, as was she, but she still saw the same man who had promised to protect her, the same gentle strength and absolute integrity. "I am grateful for every single day I have had with you. Even the day I burned dinner so badly we had to eat in town," Victoria laughed. "Even that day. Especially that day, because it reminded me that you are human and fallible, and I love you anyway. Well, that is a relief, because I am fairly certain I am going to keep being human and fallible for the foreseeable future." Wilson pulled her into a warm embrace. "Here is to 25 more years of me making mistakes and you loving me anyway." 25 more years, Victoria agreed. "At least." They walked back to the house as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Victoria thought about that terrified woman who had ridden up to this place so many years ago. She had been running for her life, fleeing from danger and death, with no plan and no hope beyond simple survival. She had found so much more than survival here. She had found a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that had sustained her through everything life threw at them. Wilson had been right when he said no one would find her here. Victoria Emerson, the frightened seamstress fleeing from a murderous judge, had disappeared into history. In her place was Victoria Wright, wife and mother and grandmother, businesswoman and writer and advocate. A woman who had faced her fears, and one who had fought for justice and prevailed, who had built a life worth living. As they entered their home, filled with the noise and chaos of children and grandchildren gathered for the anniversary celebration, Wilson took her hand and squeezed gently. Victoria squeezed back, a private communication that needed no words. This was happiness. This messy, complicated, beautiful life they had created together. This was everything she had never dared to dream of during those dark hours of running through the night. This was home. And she was never running again.